This one is going to be uncomfortable, not because I'm going to be cruel about it, not because I think you're a bad person or that you deserve to hurt more than you already do, but because I think you've been telling yourself a story about what happened. A very comfortable, very sympathetic, very well-constructed story. And I think that story is costing you more than the heartbreak itself. And I'd rather say the hard thing than watch you carry a version of events that keeps you stuck. So, here it is. Some of what happened was your fault. Not all of it, maybe not even most of it, but some of it. A real, significant, honest sum. And you know that. Somewhere underneath the narrative you've been running, underneath the anger and the grief and the very reasonable pain, you know that you had a hand in this. You know there were things you did or didn't do, patterns you ran, moments where you chose the comfortable thing over the right thing, and that those choices contributed to the ending. And instead of sitting with that, you've been covering it, building a story around the parts that make you the injured party, collecting evidence for the version where this was done to you, not participated in by you. I understand why. I really do. Grief is hard enough without also having to hold accountability for it. When something ends and it hurts this much, the last thing you want to do is look at your own role in the wreckage. But the coping, the stories, the justifications, the careful editing of memory, that's not protecting you. That's just delaying the thing that would actually help. Let me tell you what the coping sounds like, because I think a lot of us do this without fully recognizing it as what it is. It sounds like they were emotionally unavailable, which may be true, but it doesn't ask the question of why you stayed with someone emotionally unavailable for as long as you did. It doesn't ask what that unavailability was doing for you, whether it let you stay at a safe distance too, whether it meant you never had to be feely seen, whether their unavailability was, on some level, a feature rather than a bug. It sounds like they didn't appreciate me, which may also be true, but it doesn't ask whether you made yourself easy to appreciate, whether you communicated what you needed clearly, whether you showed up as the full version of yourself or a managed, careful version designed to be likable, whether you were actually present in the relationship or just there. It sounds like I gave everything and got nothing back. And I want to be careful here because sometimes this is just true, full stop, and you really were in something that took without returning. But sometimes, I gave everything as covering for something else. Sometimes giving everything is a way of controlling the dynamic. Sometimes the constant giving is designed unconsciously to put the other person in debt, to make leaving harder for them, to build a case in advance for why you're the good one if this falls apart. Giving can be generous. Giving can also be a strategy, and only you know which one it was. It sounds like they changed, but people don't usually change in a vacuum. Relationships change people. Your behavior in the relationship changes people. The environment you two created together changes both of you. When someone becomes distant or cold or checked out, it's worth asking, genuinely, honestly asking, what the environment was like. What was it like to be with you when things were hard? What they were responding to. I'm not saying it was your fault they changed. I'm saying change doesn't happen in isolation, and the story that casts you as the passive witness to someone else's transformation is probably missing some of your own. Here's the thing about the comfortable story. The one where you're the one who tried and they're the one who failed. The one where the ending is their fault and your pain is entirely undeserved and there's nothing to examine on your end. That story feels better in the short term. Of course it does. It protects you from the really uncomfortable work of looking at yourself clearly. It lets you stay in the grief without having to complicate it with accountability. It lets you be sad without also having to be honest. But it has a cost, a specific, measurable cost. The cost is that you take nothing from this into the next thing. You exit this relationship with the same patterns, the same blind spots, the same tendencies that contributed to the ending. Because you never looked at them, you never identified them, you never held them up to the light and said, this is a me thing, this is something I do, this needs to change, and then you do it again. Different person, same dynamic, different face on the same shape of relationship, and it ends the same way. And you tell the same story again, and the story protects you again, and you take nothing again. That loop is why some people go their entire lives in relationships that follow the same pattern and never understand why. Not because they're unlucky, because they're very good at being the protagonist of a story that never asks them to grow. I want to be specific about some of the things we do, the actual behaviors. because I think naming them is more useful than speaking in abstractions. We go cold when we should go honest. Something bothers us and something real and something worth addressing, and instead of saying it clearly, we pull back. We get quieter. We create distance. We let the temperature in the room drop and wait for the other person to notice and ask. And when they don't ask, or when they ask wrong or not enough or in the wrong tone, we take that as evidence that they don't care. When really what happened is we asked them to read our minds and they failed a test they didn't know they were taking. We punish in small ways. We're less warm after a fight. We remember and bring it up later. We keep score and then act like we're not keeping score. We do the thing where we say, "I'm fine," while very clearly not being fine, and then resent them for believing us. We pick the wrong moments to be honest and then wonder why honesty doesn't go well. We drop something heavy right when they're stressed or exhausted or in the middle of something. And when the conversation doesn't go the way we needed, we add it to the list of evidence that they can't handle us, that they don't prioritize our feelings, that they're not equipped for this relationship. We confuse intimacy with intensity. We think fighting means we care. We think drama means depth. We manufacture urgency in relationships that are actually healthy and stable because health and stability feel boring, feel unfamiliar, feel like the absence of passion rather than the presence of something real. We love loudly in the beginning and quietly disappear as it gets more real. We're incredibly present and attentive in the early phase, and then once we feel secure, we coast. We stop putting in the effort that got us here because we think arrival means the work is done. It doesn't. Arrival is when the work starts. We make the other person responsible for our emotional state. When we're happy, it's because of them, and we tell them so. But when we're anxious or insecure or struggling, that's also because of them. Their behavior, their distance, something they did or didn't do. We make them the weather of our inner life and then resent them for not always being sunny. We leave before we leave. We check out emotionally while still physically present. We stop investing in the thing months before it technically ends, and then when it ends, we act like we were fully in it right up to the last moment. We weren't. We'd already started protecting ourselves from a loss we were quietly engineering. Any of that land. Here's what I think is actually underneath the coping, because I don't think it's dishonesty. Exactly. I don't think most people sit down and consciously decide to distort what happened. I think it's fear. Specifically the fear that if you look at your role clearly, if you actually account for your part of the wreckage, you'll find something unfixable, something fundamentally wrong with you, some evidence that you are, at your core, the kind of person who ruins things, who doesn't know how to love correctly, who is too much or not enough or broken in some way that won't yield to effort. That's the fear underneath the story. The story protects you from having to find out if that fear is true. But here's what I want you to hear. Actually hear it. Looking at your part in something doesn't mean confirming your worst fears about yourself. It just means looking at behaviors, patterns, choices, things you did in specific moments for specific reasons that you can understand and, if you choose to, change. You are not your worst moments in a relationship. You are also not separate from them. They're data. They tell you something about where you were, what you needed, how you were operating, and that information is genuinely useful if you let yourself have it. The fear says if I look honestly, I'll find out I'm irredeemable. The truth is, if you look honestly, you'll find out you're human, imperfect and patterned, and sometimes self-protective in ways that hurt other people, just like every person who has ever been in a relationship. That's not a verdict, that's a starting point. Let me talk about what accountability actually looks like, because I think people avoid it partly because they imagine it as this punishing, self-flagellating thing, like looking honestly at yourself means spending months in a shame spiral, rehashing everything you did wrong, deciding you're terrible. That's not accountability, that's just shame with better lighting. Real accountability is quieter than that. It looks more like sitting down at some point when the sharpest grief has passed and asking yourself some honest questions, not rhetorical ones designed to confirm a narrative, actual ones. What did I do in this relationship that I wouldn't want someone to do to me? Not the obvious stuff, not the big fights or the bad days. The small, consistent stuff. The daily texture of how I showed up. What did I know was wrong and keep doing anyway? What did I avoid saying because saying it would have required me to change something I wasn't ready to change? Where was I unfair? Not just in the moments I already know about, the ones I've been editing out of the version I tell people. What did this person need from me that I wasn't willing to give? And was it actually something I couldn't give, or just something I chose not to? Those questions are hard. They're supposed to be hard, but they're also genuinely useful in a way that no amount of righteous anger about what they did to you ever will be, because the answers to those questions travel with you. They're portable. They go into the next relationship and make you better at it. They turn heartbreak into something that costs you once instead of costing you every time. There's one more thing I want to name before we get to the other side of this, and it's the one that's hardest to say because it implicates something we don't like to look at. Sometimes the coping isn't just about protecting yourself from accountability. Sometimes it's about protecting your image of yourself as a good person, as someone who loves well, as someone who, when relationships end, can look back and genuinely say, I tried, I was present, I gave it everything. That image matters to a lot of us, more than we admit. We want to be the person who loved honestly and got hurt anyway, not the person who contributed to their own heartbreak through avoidable choices. We want to be the protagonist of a love story, not the cautionary tale. And so we protect the image. We curate the memory. We tell the story to friends in a way that quietly omits the parts where we weren't our best selves. And slowly, through repetition, we start to believe the curated version. It becomes the real one. The messy, complicated actual version gets buried under the one that makes us look okay. But you can't grow from a version of yourself that you've cleaned up for public consumption. You grow from the real one, the one that includes the moments you're not proud of, the one that captures not just what happened, but how you made people feel, the one that honestly accounts for what you brought into the room. The insecurity, the patterns, the defense mechanisms, the ways you protected yourself that accidentally hurt someone else. And that version isn't shameful, it's just true. And truth is the only thing you can actually work with. I want to say something about the grief, because I don't want this to feel like I'm dismissing it. Your pain is real. Whatever happened, however complicated your role in it, the loss is real and the hurt is real, and you are allowed to feel all of it without having to earn it through perfect behavior. You don't have to have been blameless to deserve to grieve. The grief and the accountability can exist at the same time. In fact, I think that's the only way to actually heal from something like this, not choosing between feeling it and examining it, but doing both. Letting yourself hurt fully while also slowly, with compassion for yourself, looking at what's yours to own. Because the coping and the comfortable story, the edited version, it doesn't actually protect you from the pain. It just reroutes it. You still feel it, you still carry it. You just carry it alongside a story that keeps you from understanding it. And understanding it is what lets you put it down eventually. Not the story, the actual thing. The real account of what happened, your role in theirs, what was real and what was projected, what was love and what was fear wearing love's clothes. That understanding is the only version of this that leads somewhere. The story just leads back to the same place. So stop coping. Or start slowly to stop, not all at once, not by burning down every comforting thing you've been telling yourself in the one brutal session of self-examination. That's not useful either. Just start making room. Start allowing the possibility that the story you've been telling isn't the whole story. Start letting the questions in, not to punish yourself, but because you are curious about yourself and you deserve to know yourself accurately. Start being as honest with yourself about your own behavior as you are about theirs. Because here's what's true. The heartbreak you're carrying right now and the real weight of it, the part that won't quite heal, I don't think it's only about them. I think some of it is about you. About things you did that you wish you'd done differently. About the person you were in this relationship that you don't fully want to be. You know that. You've known it. You've just been covering it with everything else because sitting with it is hard and sitting with it feels like losing. But it's not losing, it's the beginning of actually getting somewhere. The pain doesn't go away when you stop coping, but it changes shape. It becomes something you can hold and look at and learn from instead of something that just lives in you without meaning. And meaning is the only thing that makes any of this worth what it cost. You already paid. You might as well take what you bought. I want to ask you something, and I need you to actually sit with it before you answer. Not the surface answer. Not the answer you give when someone asks how things are going, and you say, "Good, yeah, we're good," because it's easier than explaining the thing you can't fully explain yet. Not the answer that protects them. Not the answer that protects you from having to admit something uncomfortable. The real one. Do they deserve you? And I already know what some of you are doing right now. You're softening it. You're reframing it. You're saying, well, it's not about deserving. Relationships aren't a transaction. Nobody's keeping score. And that's true technically. Love isn't a ledger. I'm not asking you to add up points. But I think we use that logic, it's not about deserving logic, to avoid asking a question that would give us an answer we're not ready for. We call it maturity. We call it seeing the full picture. We call it not being naive about how love works. Sometimes it's just avoidance with better vocabulary. So I'm asking again, slower this time. Do they deserve you? Let me tell you what I think deserving actually looks like in practice. Because I don't think it's about being perfect. I don't think it's about never messing up or never going through something that makes you hard to be around for a while. Everyone goes through something. Everyone has seasons where they're not their best self. That's not what I'm asking about. I'm asking about the baseline, the default, the way they treat you when nothing is wrong, when there's no crisis, when it's just a regular Tuesday, and you're both just existing in each other's orbit. Do they pay attention to you? Not in a surveillance way, in a you matter to me way. Do they notice when you're off before you have to say you're off? Do they ask follow-up questions about the things you mentioned last week, or does everything you say kind of evaporate the moment the conversation ends? Do they show up not just for the big stuff like the emergencies, the celebrations, the things where showing up is easy because the stakes are obvious? The small stuff, the random Tuesday stuff, the I was thinking about you for no reason and wanted you to know stuff. Do they make you feel like being with you is something they actively want or something they're passively okay with? There's a difference. And you know the difference. You feel it every time they reach for you versus every time you're the one reaching. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. Most of us who end up in the wrong relationships, but in relationships where the love is real, but the care is uneven, where the connection is genuine, but the effort is lopsided. We don't end up there because we're stupid. We end up there because we're hopeful, because we're good at seeing potential, because we genuinely believe in people, and we're willing to stick around while they figure themselves out. That's a beautiful quality. I mean that with no sarcasm. But it also means we spend a lot of time loving people for who they could be instead of paying full attention to who they currently are. We're always working slightly ahead of reality, already in the version of this that exists 6 months from now, when they've grown into the person we see in them, when the relationship has settled into what we know it can be. And while we're living in that future version, the present version keeps not showing up, keeps texting back late, keeps going quiet at the exact moments we need them loud, keeps making us feel like we're asking for too much when we asked for the minimum, keeps doing just enough to keep us from leaving, but not enough to make us feel chosen. And we stay, because we can see it. We can see what this is building toward. We can see who they're becoming, except, and this is the part that's hard to say, they're not building toward anything. They're just here, right now, exactly this. And the version you keep waiting for is a fiction you wrote to make the present one livable. That's not love. Or, it is love, it's completely love. What you're feeling is absolutely real, but it's love aimed at a projection, and projections can't hold you when you need to be held. I want to talk about the stories we tell ourselves because I think this is where most of the damage actually happens, not in the relationship itself, but in the narration we build around it. You notice something, a pattern, the way they consistently make plans and then half cancel. The way they're always a little more present right after you pull back, then go quiet again once you come back. The way they talk about the future in vague terms that never quite include you specifically. The way you always feel a little bit like you're auditioning. You notice it, and then immediately, without even thinking about it, you explain it. They're just going through something right now. They're not great at communication, that's just how they are with everyone. They had a bad experience before you, and they need time to trust. They're stressed, they're distracted, they're working on it. And look, some of those things might be true. People do go through things. People are sometimes bad at communication. People do carry wounds from before you that take time to work through. But here's the question you're not asking. Why is it always your job to account for all of that? Why are you the one doing the interpretive work? Why are you the one translating their behavior into the most generous possible version so that you can keep feeling okay about being here? Why are you working so hard to make their absence make sense while they're not working at all to show up? You're writing them a story they didn't earn, and you're doing it because the alternative, believing what you're actually seeing, is a loss you're not ready to hold yet. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from this, and I want to name it because I don't think we talk about it enough. It's not the exhaustion of doing too much, it's the exhaustion of hoping too long. Because hope takes energy, real, physical energy. Every time you pick up your phone and feel that small drop when it's not them. Every time you replay a conversation trying to figure out if it meant what you wanted it to mean. Every time you prepare yourself for a version of them that doesn't quite materialize. Every time you choose to stay open when everything in you is starting to close. That's work. Invisible, unacknowledged, completely unsustainable work. And the worst part is you can't really explain it to anyone. Because from the outside, everything looks fine. You're together. You're okay. Nothing catastrophic has happened. There's nothing to point to. It's just this quiet, constant, low-grade drain. Like a light you left on in a room you're not using. It doesn't seem like much, but eventually it runs something down. I want to be honest about something that I think gets glossed over in conversations like this. Sometimes the person doesn't deserve you not because they're a bad person, but because they're a good person who is not built for what you need. And that is somehow harder. Way harder. Because if they were awful, you could leave and feel justified. If they were unkind or cruel or checked out completely, the decision would make sense to everyone, including you. But they're not awful. They're actually pretty good. They care about you in their way. They have real qualities that you love. They've been there for you in real moments. The history is real. The warmth is real. They're just not enough. For you, specifically. For the way you love and the way you need to be loved. And that's a loss that doesn't fit neatly into any category. You can't be angry about it. You can't even fully grieve it because nothing technically died. It just quietly wasn't what you needed. And the longer you stay, the more you reshape yourself to fit into something that was never quite your size. Deserving isn't only about behavior. It's about fit. It's about whether this person, as they actually are right now, is capable of giving you what you actually need. Not theoretically, not eventually. Now. And if the honest answer is no, even if you love them, even if they love you, even if it's real, that no matters, let me ask you something else. When you imagine your life 5 years from now, the version you actually want, not the version you've been negotiating yourself down to, are they in it? Not as a project, not as someone you're still patiently developing, as a person, as who they are right now exactly as they are, flaws and growth edge and current limitations and all. Do you want that, or do you want the idea of them completed? Because there's a version of staying that is really just an extended negotiation with reality, where you're not in the relationship you have, and that you're in the relationship you're waiting for. And that waiting can go on for a long time if you let it. Long enough that you forget you were waiting. Long enough that it starts to feel like this is just what love is. It's not. Love is not a holding pattern. Love, real, actual, mutual, present tense love, feels like landing, like arriving somewhere, like the effort you're putting in is going somewhere and being met and building something. If it doesn't feel like that, if it feels more like effort into a void and hope into a silence, then I think you have your answer to the original question. They don't deserve you not because they're terrible, but because deserving you means being present for you, means meeting you somewhere close to where you're standing, means caring enough to try in ways that are visible and consistent and real. And they're not doing that. Not enough, not yet, maybe not ever. Now here's the part where I have to be honest about the other side of this. Because this isn't a clean story with a clean villain. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the reason we end up with people who don't quite show up for us is because we make it too easy for them not to. We pick up the slack so seamlessly that they never feel the gap. We cover for their absence so naturally that they don't even register there's been an absence to cover for. We're so consistent, so giving, so reliably there, that they get used to being the one who receives. Not out of malice, not even out of selfishness exactly, just gravity. Things move toward the path of least resistance, and we made the path very smooth. And this is the part that's hard to sit with, because it's not about blame. You didn't do anything wrong by loving generously. That is not a flaw. But it might have accidentally taught someone that they didn't need to match you, that you'd still be there, that the relationship would hold regardless of their investment level. You trained them, sort of, without meaning to, rewarded their passivity with your presence, showed them that the minimum was enough to keep you. So when I ask, do they deserve you, I also want to ask, have you ever actually shown them what it looks like when they don't? Have you ever let the gap show instead of immediately filling it? Have you ever said out loud clearly without softening it, I need more than this, and if I don't get it, I will leave? Not as a threat, as a truth, as information, because some people don't know what they have until they're actually close to losing it. Not in a game-playing way, for real. Sometimes love needs to feel the gravity of its own loss before it learns to hold on. You've been doing all the holding. You haven't let them feel what it would mean to let go. Some people step up when that becomes real, some people don't. But either way, you need to find out. Because the alternative is spending the rest of this relationship being the only one who's truly in it. And you deserve better than a love that only stays because you never gave it a reason to try. I keep thinking about this image, someone standing at a door knocking. Not desperately, not frantically, just steadily, patiently. Because they genuinely believe that eventually the door will open. And the door opens sometimes just enough light comes through that it feels like it's working. That the knocking is doing something, that they'll be let all the way in soon. And they keep knocking. I think a lot of us are that person. We've been knocking for so long that we've forgotten what we're actually asking for. We've gotten so used to the half-open door that we've stopped imagining what a fully open one would feel like. But you weren't meant to live in a doorway. You were meant to be let in. And somewhere out there, I believe this, I really do, somewhere there is a door that opens when it hears you coming, before you even knock. A person who doesn't need you to convince them, who doesn't require you to earn your place, who sees you clearly and wants exactly that. That person won't make you wonder. They won't make you wait. They won't make you build a story around their absence to make it survivable. They'll just be there, steadily, visibly, consistently there. I want to say one more thing before we get to the end of this, and it's the part I think people need to hear the most, even though it's the part most people are least ready for. You are allowed to leave something that isn't working, even if it isn't catastrophic. I think we've collectively decided that you need a really good reason to end something. Like there has to be a defining incident, a betrayal, a pattern of cruelty, something that would hold up in court almost. Something you could explain to anyone and have them nod and say, yeah, that makes sense. I get why you left. And if you don't have that, if it's just a slow drain, just a quiet mismatch, just the feeling of being slightly smaller than yourself for a very long time, then leaving feels selfish, dramatic, like you're giving up on something you should have stayed for. That is not true. Feeling consistently unseen by someone who claims to love you is a reason. Carrying the emotional weight of a relationship mostly alone is a reason. Reshaping yourself over and over to fit into something that was never quite built for you is a reason. Waking up next to someone and feeling lonely is a reason. You do not need their behavior to be unforgivable in order for your unhappiness to be valid. You do not need to wait for a catastrophe to justify protecting yourself. Sometimes the quiet reasons are the realest ones, the ones nobody else can fully see, the ones that live in the small daily accumulation of not quite enough. Those reasons are allowed to be enough. You are allowed to choose yourself. Not because they're terrible, not because the love isn't real, just because you know when you're honest that this isn't the shape of a life you want to keep living. That is a complete and legitimate reason to go. So, do they deserve you? You don't have to answer me, but I think you should answer yourself. Quietly, honestly, without the softening and the generous interpretations and the future version you keep projecting onto them. Just the truth of it. Just what you actually know underneath all the hoping. Because here is what I know about you. The version of you that loves this hard, that stays this long, that gives this much even when it's not coming back equally. That version of you deserves something that matches it. Not perfect. Not without difficulty or friction or the occasional season where things are hard. Just matched. Genuinely, effortfully show up even on Tuesdays. Matched. You have been so patient. You have been so generous. You have given so much of yourself to something that keeps asking for more without asking how you are. I think you know the answer to the question. I think you've known for a while. The only thing left is deciding what you're going to do with it. I used to believe that people stayed. I really did. I believed that the ones you let in, the ones you trusted, the ones you loved, they would always be there. That some bonds were unbreakable. That some people were permanent fixtures in your life. But life has a way of showing you the truth. It starts small, a friend who doesn't reply for weeks, a partner who drifts away without explanation, a sibling who moves on with their own life and forgets the moments you thought mattered. I remember the first time I felt it for real. I called someone I trusted, someone I thought would answer no matter what. And there was nothing. Just the ringing, the silence, the empty void where connection used to be. And in that silence, it hit me. People leave. Not always because they want to, not always because they mean to, but sometimes just because life moves on without them. I kept trying to hold on. I tried texting, calling, making plans, being available. I gave more than I should have, sacrificed comfort, and ignored red flags. I wanted them to stay. I wanted the certainty of their presence in my life. But they didn't. And every time someone left, I asked myself the same question. Was it me? Was I not enough? Was I too much? Was I too quiet, too loud, too complicated, too simple? I overanalyzed everything, replayed every conversation, every laugh, every glance, trying to find the moment they decided to leave. And slowly that questioning becomes a pattern. You start expecting departure before it even happens. You brace for absence before it touches you. You begin to withdraw, to protect yourself from the inevitable pain. Because the truth is, the people you love, the ones you open your heart to, they don't always stay. And the weight of that realization hits harder than the loss itself. I stayed loyal, I stayed caring, I stayed present. And yet, one by one, they left. And every time it happened, I felt smaller, less certain, less safe, less myself. I began to notice the pattern. I saw the fleeting nature of human attention, of human connection. I realized that attachment doesn't guarantee permanence, that love, effort, and devotion don't always secure someone's presence. And the hardest part, the leaving isn't always dramatic, it isn't always loud or angry. Most of the time it's quiet, invisible, a slow fade until you're left staring at the empty space they used to fill. And in that silence, the doubt creeps in. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm unlovable. Maybe everyone leaves because I'm not enough. I want you to understand this part because it's the moment that defines everything that comes after. The moment you see that no matter how much you give, no matter how much you care, some people just leave. And it leaves a hole, a hollow ache that isn't just missing someone, it's missing the certainty that someone was supposed to stay. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just them leaving, it was me too. Not that I caused it, not that I pushed them away intentionally, but I realized I had been carrying people the way you carry fragile glass, careful, hopeful, afraid to let go. I gave everything I had, my time, my trust, my heart, without measuring if it was returned. And when they left, I felt betrayed. But the betrayal wasn't entirely theirs. Part of it was mine. Part of it was believing permanence was guaranteed, believing that love alone could anchor someone who wasn't ready to stay. I started noticing patterns. The friends who left when I needed them most, the people who only stayed when life was convenient, the ones I chased, overanalyzed, overexplained myself to. It wasn't that I wasn't lovable. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It was that I was giving to people who weren't prepared to meet me where I stood. I had built my sense of security around others' presence instead of my own. I let my happiness hinge on messages that may never come, on plans that may never be kept, on people who could leave without warning. And in doing so, I allowed absence to feel like failure. I began to question why I kept myself open to that pain. Why did I care more than they did? Why did I stay longer than they could? Why did I invest my energy in people who didn't match it? And slowly, painfully, I understood. It wasn't about them leaving. It was about me learning, about recognizing my patterns of overgiving, of chasing, of hoping for something that was never fully mine, about understanding that my heart was generous, yes, but it needed boundaries, that care and devotion are valuable, but only when matched. I realized I had been mistaking attachment for love, persistence for connection, hope for reality, and that realization cut deep. Because the truth is, attachment without reciprocity isn't love. It's longing, and longing without response is a weight no one should carry forever. I began to see how my fears of abandonment, of not being enough, had shaped every interaction. I stayed longer than I should have. I gave more than I needed. I pretended that absence didn't hurt. And the more I did, the more I trained myself to accept the inevitable. Everyone leaves in the end. But the key wasn't to stop caring. The key wasn't to build walls so high no one could reach me. The key was to notice the pattern, to understand my own role in it, to reclaim the power I had been giving away. It wasn't easy. Recognition always hurts. Self-reflection always burns. But understanding the why behind the pain was the first step toward freedom. And in that understanding, I began to glimpse something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Possibility, not for them, not for the ones who left, but for me. Possibility that I could show up differently. Possibility that I could care without losing myself. Possibility that love didn't have to end with leaving. I started changing the way I showed up. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, I stopped over-explaining myself. I stopped chasing texts, calls, or attention that wasn't freely given. I stopped bending over backward to prove my worth. Instead of hoping people would stay, I watched how they treated me. I matched energy instead of giving more than I received. I let the ones who weren't consistent drift away without argument, without guilt, and for the first time in a long time, it felt calm. I learned the power of boundaries, real ones, not just the ones I whispered to myself at night. Boundaries that said, I will not stay in a space where I am not wanted. I will not beg for care. I will not diminish myself to keep someone around. Boundaries that felt like armor, but also like freedom. I realized something important. Leaving isn't always their choice. Sometimes it's a reflection of their own lives, their own struggles. Sometimes they leave because they can't stay. And that's not my failure. That's not a reflection of my worth. I started to internalize it. My love didn't have to be reciprocated to be valid. My care didn't have to be rewarded to matter. And the truth was, I was allowed to step back, to protect my heart, to save myself from the endless cycle of longing and loss. I practiced observing instead of reacting. I observed patterns. I observed moments where I felt drained, unnoticed, unappreciated. I observed my own feelings without judgment, and each time I reminded myself, I am enough. My presence matters. My energy is valuable. It wasn't about becoming cold or bitter. It was about becoming steady, calm, certain about knowing my worth even when others didn't, about understanding that someone leaving didn't erase what I had to give. It just meant I had to give it to someone ready to receive it. And in that steadiness, something shifted. The panic I used to feel when someone didn't reply immediately started to fade. The ache I felt when plans fell through became manageable. I didn't stop caring. I didn't stop loving. I stopped sacrificing myself for the illusion of permanence. It was a quiet power, the kind that doesn't scream or demand. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy. But it was mine. And for the first time, I felt anchored not by someone else's presence, but by my own. I began to see life differently. People would leave. It was inevitable. But I didn't have to leave myself behind with them. I could show up fully, openly, honestly, and still walk away when it wasn't returned. I could value my heart enough to protect it, even when it hurt to do so. And that hurt. It was different now. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't panic. It was acknowledgement. It was understanding. It was a lesson, a refining fire, a guide for how to move forward without losing myself. And then one day I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping anymore. I wasn't measuring my worth against who stayed or who left. I was standing firmly in my own life, in my own heart, and it was enough. I still feel the ache of absence sometimes, but it doesn't define me. I don't need people to validate my presence. I don't need anyone to choose me to feel whole. I've learned that care is powerful, but self-respect is stronger. That love is generous, but boundaries protect the soul. I began showing up differently. I still care, yes, but selectively. I still give, yes, but intentionally. I still open my heart, yes, but to those who are ready to meet me there. And every time someone leaves, it no longer shatters me. It informs me. It reminds me of the patterns I no longer repeat. I stopped chasing ghosts. I stopped hoping for consistency from those who had none to give. I stopped believing that permanence was guaranteed, and in that clarity I found freedom. Freedom to grieve without guilt. Freedom to love without fear. Freedom to exist without needing permission. The truth is, everyone leaves in the end. But that doesn't mean I am left behind. It doesn't mean my love is wasted. It doesn't mean my heart is broken beyond repair. It means I am human. It means I am learning. It means I am growing. And in that growth, I found something stronger than attachment. Myself. I walk through life knowing that people may come, people may go, and that's okay. Because I am steady. Because I am whole. Because I am not defined by who chooses to stay, but by how fiercely I choose to honor my own heart. And that changes everything. I stayed. I grew. I am ready now. I don't think I noticed when it changed. That's the thing about this particular kind of loss. It doesn't arrive with a timestamp. There's no moment you can point to and say, there, that's where it shifted. It's more like you wake up one day and reach for something that used to be warm and find that it's just room temperature now. And you try to remember when it cooled and you can't. You weren't watching, you were inside it, you were living your life. And now you're standing in the middle of something that looks exactly like what you had before and feels completely different. And you don't know what to do with that because nothing technically happened. Nothing broke. Nothing ended. It just changed. Quietly, without asking your permission, without giving you any warning at all. That's what I want to talk about. Not the dramatic end of love, not the betrayal or the blow up or the relationship that crashes and burns in a way you can at least narrate. The other thing, the slower thing, the thing where love just becomes something else, something you recognize but can't quite feel the same way anymore. There's a specific version of the beginning of love that I think we spend a long time chasing without realizing that's what we're doing. You know the one, where everything about the other person is interesting, where you want to know every single thing about them. Not because you're trying to assess them as a partner, not because you're running through a checklist, but because the information itself is fascinating, because it's them, because every detail adds to this picture you're building and the picture keeps getting better, where you think about them in between seeing them, not anxiously, not the worried, overthinking kind of thinking, just the warm kind, the kind where they drift into your head while you're doing something else and it makes whatever you're doing a little lighter, where physical closeness feels like relief, where being in the same room as them is just better than being in a room without them, where you reach for them automatically without thinking, because reaching for them is just what your body does now. I'm not being naive about it. I know that phase doesn't last forever. I know it's not meant to. I know that what comes after it, the familiarity, the depth, the specific comfort of being truly known over time, is supposed to be richer, more real, more sustainable. I know all of that. But I also think something important lives in that early feeling that can get lost in the transition. And when it gets lost, when you notice it's gone and you can't find where you left it, it's one of the more disorienting experiences a person can have. Because you still love them. You're sure of that. You're almost certain. But the love feels different now, and you don't know if different means deeper, or if different means diminished, or if different means something is wrong, or if this is just what love becomes, and you're supposed to be fine with it, and you don't want to say that out loud. Because saying it out loud makes it real. Because saying it out loud means you might have to do something about it. Because saying it out loud to the person you love means watching their face change in a way you can't take back. So you keep it in, and you try to figure out if what you're feeling is a truth or just a season. Let me try to describe what it actually feels like, the texture of it, because I think the experience is specific enough that it deserves specificity. It feels like going through the motions of something you used to do naturally, like the actions are all the same, the morning texts, the inside jokes, the way you find each other at the end of the day, but they're running on memory now instead of impulse. You're doing them because you've always done them. Because they're part of the structure of this, because stopping would mean something. It feels like looking at photographs from a year ago and being genuinely moved by them, by what you see in both of your faces, by the obvious realness of what was there, and then looking up from the photographs and trying to locate that same thing in the room you're currently in, and finding something quieter, something steadier, but not the same thing. It feels like effort where there wasn't effort before. Not bad effort, not the effort of fighting or managing or holding something damaged together, just the low-grade effort of being engaged, of being present, of generating warmth rather than just feeling it. And you wonder, is this normal? Is this what they mean when they say love is a choice? Is this what mature love actually looks like, and I've just been comparing it to the beginning, which is an unfair comparison which everyone says you shouldn't make? Or is this something else? Is this the feeling of something that's quietly been running out? Here's what I think happens, and I want to be careful here because I'm not sure I have it fully figured out. I think love changes for a lot of reasons, and not all of them are bad. Time changes it. Comfort changes it. The way two people settle into each other changes it. The urgency softens, the novelty fades, the constant low-level electricity of early love, which is genuinely not sustainable and would burn you out, becomes something calmer. That's not death, that's development. That's the thing actually taking root instead of just flowering. But I also think love can change because something went unaddressed, because two people drifted in a direction nobody named, because small resentments accumulated without being resolved, because one person changed and the other person didn't fully notice, or noticed and didn't know how to talk about it, because the communication that would have kept things close got replaced by the comfort that assumes closeness without checking. And those two things, natural development and quiet erosion, can feel almost identical from the inside, which is why it's so hard to know what you're dealing with, which is why people stay in things that have quietly stopped working for years, and also why people leave things that only needed a conversation. The feeling of distance doesn't tell you its own cause. You have to do that work yourself. I want to talk about the loneliness that lives inside this because I think it's one of the loneliest experiences there is, and it almost never gets named. You are with someone, you love them, you are committed to this, to them, to the life you've built together, and you are lonely. Not always, not completely, but in a real and specific way that you don't know how to explain to anyone, including them. You are lonely for the version of this that used to exist, for the version of them you fell in love with, which is not gone exactly, just harder to access. For the version of yourself that existed inside that early love, that felt so lit up by another person, that moved through the world with this specific lightness that came from being fully, recently chosen. You miss a feeling that technically hasn't ended. You grieve something that is still here, and you can't say that. Because if you say that to the person you're with, what you're saying is, I love you, but being with you used to feel better than this. And that is true and real and doesn't make you a bad person, but it will land like a wound, and you know it. So you carry it. You try to generate the feeling through action, through dates and gestures, and recreating the conditions of the early thing as if the early thing was a recipe you could follow. Sometimes that works for a night. Sometimes you catch a glimpse of it and it's enough to keep you going. Sometimes it doesn't work and you sit across from someone you've loved for years, feeling further away than the distance between your chairs. There are things that change love that we don't talk about honestly enough. Disappointment changes it. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The accumulated weight of small moments where they weren't who you needed them to be. The times you needed them to show up and they didn't. The conversations you tried to have that went nowhere. The ways they've let you see them clearly. And some of what you've seen has been harder to love than you expected. You still love them, but loving someone and being disappointed by them at the same time takes up space. And if the disappointment never gets addressed, if it just gets filed away, handled, moved past without really being resolved, it builds up somewhere, and it changes the texture of the love, makes it a little heavier to carry. Boredom changes it too, and I know that's uncomfortable to say, but I think it's true. Not boredom with the person necessarily, boredom with the shape of things, with the predictability, with knowing exactly how most conversations are going to go, how most evenings are going to end, what they're going to say about any given topic before they say it. That predictability is also comfort. It's also safety. It's also the thing people mean when they say they want a partner, and not just a feeling. But it can quietly drain something from the experience of being together if nobody tends to it. If you let the routine become the whole thing. And then there's change itself. People change. You've changed. They've changed. And sometimes two people change in directions that continue to align, and sometimes they change in directions that quietly diverge. And if you're not paying attention, if you're assuming alignment because that's how it used to be, you can find yourself standing next to someone who is genuinely different from the person you fell in love with without either of you having done anything wrong. I want to say something about the guilt, because I think people who feel this carry a disproportionate amount of guilt for something that isn't a moral failing. You didn't choose for love to feel different. You didn't decide one morning to care less, to feel less, to be less moved by the person you've committed yourself to. It didn't happen because you weren't trying hard enough or grateful enough or mature enough. Feelings don't work like that. You cannot effort your way into an emotion. You cannot guilt yourself into warmth. And yet most people who feel this spend enormous energy blaming themselves for it, telling themselves they're selfish, telling themselves a better person would just appreciate what they have, telling themselves that if they were more emotionally disciplined, more grateful, more adult about the whole thing, they wouldn't be standing here wondering where the feeling went. That's not fair, and it's also not useful. The guilt doesn't bring the feeling back. It just adds a layer of shame on top of an already uncomfortable truth. And shame makes you less likely to address the thing directly, because addressing it means admitting it, and admitting it means facing the shame you've been trying to outrun. So you end up in this place where you feel something true, feel guilty for feeling it, can't address it because the guilt is in the way, and the thing just continues. Let the guilt go, or at least set it down long enough to look at what's underneath it, because underneath it is just a person who loves someone and is trying to understand why something that used to feel one way feels different now. That's not a character flaw. That's just being human in a long relationship with another human who's also changing all the time. You're allowed to feel this and still be a good person. You're allowed to name this and still love them. You're allowed to be confused and uncertain and a little sad about the distance between now and then, without it meaning that everything is over. Give yourself that much. You've been carrying this long enough without that. So what do? I don't think there's a clean answer to that. I think it depends on what you're actually dealing with. Whether this is natural development or quiet erosion, whether the love has changed or the relationship has stopped tending the love, whether you've grown apart or just stopped checking in. But I do think the first thing is naming it, saying it somewhere, even if just to yourself first. Not dramatizing it, not catastrophizing it, just being honest about what you feel. Love feels different now. I don't know what that means yet, but it's true, and I'm not going to keep pretending it isn't, because the pretending is what makes it worse. The pretending is what lets the slow erosion continue unchecked. The pretending is how two people who once loved each other deeply and fully end up feeling like strangers sharing a space, both of them grieving something neither of them ever named. You owe it to yourself and to them to name it, not as an accusation, not as a verdict, just as information. As a real and honest thing that's happening inside you that the relationship deserves to know about. Because sometimes naming it is what brings it back. Sometimes the conversation you've been afraid to have is the thing that opens a door you thought had closed. Sometimes love that has quieted down is not love that has ended. It's love that stopped being tended and just needs someone to tend it again. And sometimes you name it and you find out that you've both been feeling it. That you've both been carrying this private grief about what used to exist. And somehow, impossibly, that shared grief becomes the beginning of something closer than what you had before, because you're finally actually in it together instead of separately managing the loss of it. That happens, it really does. But also, and I want to say this gently but clearly, sometimes love changing is love telling you something true. Sometimes the feeling shifted because the fit was never quite right, and the early love was too loud to let you hear that. Sometimes you've grown into a person who needs something different from what this can give. Sometimes the relationship has run the length of what it was, and holding on past to that point isn't loyalty. It's just fear of the loss, and that's a hard thing to know, and a harder thing to act on, and I'm not telling you what to do with it. I'm just saying the feeling is information. It's not a betrayal, and it's not a failure, and it doesn't make you a bad person or an ungrateful one. It's just honest. The most honest thing your heart knows how to do is feel what it actually feels. And if what it feels is that something has changed, then something has changed. The question is whether what's changed is a beginning or an ending. Only you know that. But you have to be willing to actually look. Love doesn't feel the same anymore. That sentence can mean a lot of different things. It can mean it deepened. It can mean it drifted. It can mean you stopped tending it. It can mean you grew. It can mean you grew apart. But it always means the same first thing. It means you're paying attention. It means you care enough to notice. It means you haven't gone numb or given up or stopped trying to understand what's happening inside you. That matters. Paying attention is actually the beginning of everything. Whatever this is, whatever the love becoming different actually means for you, at least you're not looking away. At least you're still asking the question. That's where everything worth having starts. You know what hurts the most? It's not being rejected, it's realizing the person you care about never felt the same way to begin with. Not in the way you did, not in the way you hoped they did. And the worst part is, you didn't realize it right away. Because at first everything felt real. The conversations felt natural, the laughs felt genuine, the late night talks felt personal. There were moments where it seemed like something deeper was building between you. Little moments that made you believe this could actually turn into something. And when you start believing that, your heart slowly gets involved. Not all at once, but piece by piece. You start paying more attention to them. You notice the way their voice changes when they're excited. The way they talk about the things they care about. The way their mood shifts when something's bothering them. You start remembering small details about them without even trying. Things they mentioned once in passing. Their favorite music, their favorite food, the stories about their past, and without realizing it, they begin taking up more space in your mind. You think about them when something funny happens. You think about them when you hear a song they would like. You think about them when something reminds you of a conversation you once had. That's how feelings grow, quietly, naturally, without asking permission. But somewhere along the way, something starts to feel different, not wrong, just uneven. You notice that you're always the one starting conversations. You're the one asking questions, the one keeping things going, the one making the effort to stay connected. They still respond. They still talk to you. They still laugh and joke like everything is normal. But something about it feels lighter for them, like they're enjoying the moment, but not investing in it the same way you are. And you try not to think too much about it because you don't want to ruin what you have. You tell yourself you're overthinking. You tell yourself they might just be busy or distracted or maybe just not good at expressing their feelings. So you keep showing up, you keep being patient, you keep being kind. Because part of you believes that if you're consistent enough, if you're supportive enough, if you care enough, maybe one day something will change. Maybe one day they'll look at you differently. Maybe one day they'll realize you were there all along. Maybe one day the feeling will finally grow on their side too. But deep down, there's a quiet fear you try not to face. A small voice that keeps asking the same question. What if they never feel the same way? And that thought is something your heart isn't ready to accept yet. Title: She Doesn't Feel the Same Way. Part 2. The hardest part isn't the moment you realize she doesn't feel the same way. It's everything that happens before that moment. The waiting, the hoping, the convincing yourself that maybe you just need to give it more time. Because feelings don't always grow instantly, right? Sometimes people just need space. Sometimes they need to see your consistency. Sometimes they need to realize what's right in front of them. At least that's what you keep telling yourself. So you keep showing up. You keep answering her messages. You keep making time for her even when your day is busy. You listen when she talks about her problems. You support her when she's stressed. You try to be the person she can always rely on, the person who understands her, the person who stays. And slowly, you start building this idea in your head, not just about who she is, but about who the two of you could be together. You imagine simple things, conversations that haven't happened yet, moments that might happen someday, little scenarios where everything finally clicks into place. And those thoughts feel good. They make the waiting feel worth it. They make the uncertainty easier to ignore. Because as long as there's still a possibility, you don't have to let go of the hope. But reality has a quiet way of revealing itself. Not all at once. Not with some dramatic moment, just small things that slowly start adding up. Like the way she talks about someone else, not realizing how it lands when she says it. Or how she mentions a guy she finds attractive. Like it's just normal conversation. Like it wouldn't affect you. Or the way she disappears for hours, sometimes days, then comes back like nothing happened. And you're just happy she replied at all. Even if the message is short, even if the effort feels minimal, you start noticing the imbalance, but you don't want to believe it means something, because admitting the truth would mean facing a reality you've been avoiding, that maybe you care more than she ever will, that maybe you've been building something in your mind that she never intended to build with you. And the worst part is, she didn't lie to you. She didn't promise anything. She didn't say the words that would make you believe she felt the same way. You just filled in the silence yourself. You interpreted the kindness as something deeper, the attention as something meaningful, the connection as something mutual, but kindness isn't always love. Attention isn't always interest, and connection doesn't always mean someone sees you the way you see them. And slowly, the truth starts getting harder to ignore, not because she suddenly tells you, but because her actions begin saying something your heart can't keep pretending not to hear. She doesn't feel the same way, and the longer you hold on to hope, the heavier that realization becomes. At some point, the truth stops whispering, and it starts becoming impossible to ignore. Not because she finally sits you down and says the words. Most of the time that conversation never even happens. The truth shows up in quieter ways than that. It shows up in patterns, in effort, in the way someone chooses to show up in your life, or the way they don't. You start noticing things you used to overlook, How you're always the one starting the conversation. How if you stop texting first, the silence stretches longer than you expected. Hours, sometimes days, and eventually you break. You send the message anyway, because pretending you don't care feels harder than admitting that you do. You start noticing the energy difference too. How excited you are when she replies, and how normal it seems for her, like your presence in her life is something she can take or leave, not something she's worried about losing. That realization hurts in a very specific way, because you're not asking for everything. You're not asking for grand gestures or dramatic confessions. You're just asking for something simple, to feel chosen. But when someone truly wants you, you don't have to beg for that feeling. You don't have to analyze every message. You don't have to question whether you matter. It becomes obvious. And that's when the realization finally hits you. Not all at once, but slowly, like a weight settling on your chest. She doesn't feel the same way. Not in the way you hoped. Not in the way you needed. Maybe she likes you. Maybe she enjoys talking to you. Maybe she appreciates having you around. But there's a difference between appreciating someone and wanting to build something with them. And you start asking yourself questions you were too afraid to ask before. Was I just convenient? Was I just someone who was always there when she needed attention? Was I just filling space in her life while she waited for someone else? Those thoughts sting. But the deeper pain isn't even about her, it's about what you did to yourself while hoping things would change. How long you ignored your own feelings. How long you accepted less than you deserved. How long you told yourself to be patient, when patience wasn't the solution. Because love doesn't grow out of one person trying harder. Love doesn't appear just because you stayed long enough. Love isn't something you can earn by proving your loyalty and realizing that forces you to face a difficult truth. You can't make someone feel something they don't, no matter how good you are to them, no matter how much you care, no matter how much you wish it were different. And once that truth settles in, you're left with a choice, one that hurts either way. Keep holding on to someone who never chose you, or finally let go, even though part of you still wishes she would. Because the hardest thing about loving someone who doesn't feel the same way isn't losing them, it's accepting that you were never really theirs to begin with. At first, letting go doesn't feel like strength, it feels like defeat, like you're walking away from something that could have worked. If only things were slightly different. If only she saw you the way you saw her. If only she realized how much you cared. If only timing was better. If only you had said the right thing at the right moment. Your mind keeps replaying those what ifs over and over again, because your heart would rather believe in a small chance than accept a painful truth. But eventually something starts to shift inside you. Not dramatically, not overnight, just slowly. You start noticing how tired you are. Tired of hoping, tired of waiting, tired of checking your phone for a message that may or may not come, tired of feeling like your happiness depends on someone else's attention. And that's when a different kind of realization hits you, one that hurts, but also frees you. You didn't lose her because you never had her. What you lost was the version of her you created in your mind, the version that loved you back, the version that chose you, the version that saw your worth the same way you saw hers. But that version never actually existed. It was just hope, and hope can be beautiful, but when it's built on the wrong person, it slowly becomes something painful. You start seeing things more clearly, how much effort you gave, how much patience you showed, how much of yourself you poured into someone who never asked for it. And instead of feeling embarrassed about that, you begin to understand something important. There's nothing wrong with loving deeply. There's nothing wrong with caring. There's nothing wrong with believing in someone. The only mistake is giving all of that to someone who was never willing to meet you halfway. And the truth is, one day you're going to meet someone who does. Someone who doesn't make you question where you stand. Someone who doesn't make you guess how they feel. Someone who doesn't make you feel like loving them is a risk. Because when someone truly wants you, you won't have to convince them. You won't have to compete for their attention. You won't have to sit there wondering if you're enough. They'll show you clearly, consistently, without confusion. And when that happens, you'll look back at this version of yourself. The one who stayed too long, the one who hoped too hard, the one who loved someone who couldn't love him back. And instead of feeling regret, you'll feel something else. Gratitude. because that experience didn't break you, it taught you. It taught you what love shouldn't feel like. And most importantly, it taught you that the right person will never leave you wondering why they don't feel the same way. Because when someone truly loves you, you'll never have to ask that question again. Will I ever be loved? There's a question some people carry around that they never really say out loud. It doesn't come up in conversations. It's not something you ask your friends. And it's definitely not something you post online. But it sits quietly in the back of your mind. The question is simple. Will I ever be loved? Not liked. Not tolerated. Not someone people talk to when they're bored. Loved. The kind of love where someone chooses you. The kind where they stay. Because if you're being honest with yourself, you've probably watched it happen for everyone else. You see couples walking together, friends getting engaged, people talking about their person like they're the most natural thing in the world. And part of you is happy for them. But another part of you can't help wondering, why has that never happened to me? You've tried before. You've talked to people. You've opened up. You've let yourself believe that maybe this time it could be different. And for a moment, it always feels promising. They laugh at your jokes. They text you first. They tell you they enjoy talking to you. And you start to think maybe this is finally it. Maybe this is the person who's going to stay. But then something always changes. The messages get shorter. The effort starts fading. The energy you once felt from them slowly disappears. Till one day you realize something that hurts more than anything. You cared way more than they did. And after that happens enough times, you stop asking what went wrong with the relationship. You start asking what's wrong with you. You look in the mirror and start picking yourself apart. Maybe I'm not attractive enough. Maybe I'm too quiet. Maybe I'm too emotional. Maybe I'm just not the type of person someone chooses. And the worst part about that feeling is that nobody around you sees it. To everyone else, you seem normal. You go to work. You talk to people. You laugh when you're supposed to. But inside, there's this quiet loneliness that never really leaves. Because wanting to be loved isn't some dramatic fantasy. It's one of the most human things there is. To have someone who looks at you and thinks, I want this person in my life. Not temporarily, not when it's convenient, but for real. And when you've spent years feeling like that hasn't happened for you yet, that's when the doubt starts creeping in. You start wondering if maybe some people are just meant to watch love happen for everyone else and never experience it themselves. After a while, the question doesn't just stay in the back of your mind. It starts showing up everywhere. You'll be scrolling through your phone and see someone you went to school with, posting pictures with their partner, smiling, laughing, looking like they found something real. And you pause for a second, not because you're jealous in a hateful way, but because you can't help thinking, how did they figure it out? How did they find someone who chose them? Because from where you're standing, it almost feels like everyone else received instructions for love that you never got. Some people fall into relationships so easily, they meet someone, they click, and suddenly they're building a life together. Meanwhile, you're still sitting there wondering why every connection you try seems to fade before it ever becomes something real. You replay old conversations in your head, moments where you thought things were going well, the way they used to respond quickly, the way they seemed interested in you, the way they said things that made you believe they actually cared, and then you remember the shift, that slow change where their energy started pulling away, the delayed replies, the canceled plans, the feeling that you were the only one trying to keep things alive, until eventually you stopped hearing from them altogether. And what hurts the most about those moments isn't just losing the person, it's realizing how easily they walked away. Like the connection that meant so much to you, it didn't really mean that much to them. That's the part that sticks with you. Because after enough of those experiences, something inside you starts changing. You become more cautious. You hesitate before getting excited about someone new. You stop letting yourself believe things too quickly. Not because you don't want love, but because disappointment starts feeling predictable. And eventually you find yourself doing something you never used to do before. You start preparing for people to leave. Even when someone new enters your life and things feel good, there's this quiet voice in the back of your mind saying, don't get too attached. It probably won't last. So instead of enjoying the moment, you hold part of yourself back. You protect your feelings. You stay guarded. And the strange thing about that kind of loneliness is that it doesn't always happen when you're physically alone. You can be surrounded by people, talking, laughing, living your life. But deep down, there's still this quiet uncertainty, because the question never really disappears. Late at night, when everything gets quiet, it comes back again. Will someone ever truly love me? Not temporarily, not out of convenience, but the kind of love where someone looks at you and decides you're worth staying for. And when you've spent years feeling like you're still waiting for that moment, it's hard not to start wondering if maybe it was never meant for you at all. The hardest part about carrying that question, will I ever be loved, is that eventually it stops sounding like a question. It starts sounding like an answer. After enough disappointments, enough people leaving, enough almost relationships that never become real, something inside you slowly shifts. You stop expecting love, not dramatically, not in some big moment where you say you're done with relationships forever. It's quieter than that. You just stop hoping the same way you used to. When you meet someone new, you don't let yourself imagine a future with them anymore. You don't let your mind wander into those what-if scenarios, because every time you did that in the past, it eventually ended the same way they left. So now you protect yourself. You convince yourself that you don't really need love like other people do. You focus on work, on hobbies, on building a life that doesn't rely on anyone staying. And on the outside, it actually starts to look like you're doing better. You're more independent. You don't chase people anymore. You don't beg for attention. You don't sit around waiting for someone to text you back. But what most people don't see is the quiet sadness that comes with that kind of independence. Because deep down, you never actually stop wanting love. You just stop believing it would happen. There's a difference, and that difference shows up in the smallest moments. Like when you're walking somewhere alone and you see a couple holding hands, or when your friends start talking about their relationships and the little things their partner does for them, or when you're lying in bed at night and the room is completely silent. That's when the thought slips back in again. What if it never happens for me? What if I'm one of those people who's always the friend, always the listener, always the one who's there for everyone else, but never the person someone chooses? Because when you've spent enough time feeling overlooked, it starts changing the way you see yourself. You begin assuming that if someone better walks into their life, they'll choose them instead of you. That if someone more exciting shows up, you'll be forgotten. So you keep your expectations low. You tell yourself you're fine on your own. But the truth is, there's still a small part of you that wonders what it would feel like to have someone who doesn't hesitate, someone who doesn't disappear when things get complicated, someone who looks at you and doesn't need time to decide. They just know, and maybe the scariest part of all is realizing how badly you still want that, even after everything, even after the doubt, even after convincing yourself you don't need it. That small part of you still hopes that one day someone will walk into your life and prove that all those fears were wrong. But here's something most people don't realize when they ask that question. Will I ever be loved? The problem isn't that you're unlovable. The problem is that when you've been hurt enough times, you start measuring your worth by the people who didn't stay. You start using their choices as proof that you weren't enough, proof that you were easy to leave, proof that maybe love just isn't something meant for you. But those people were never the judges of your value. They were just people who passed through your life. And sometimes people leave not because you lacked something, but because they were never meant to stay long enough to see everything you are. The truth is, love doesn't happen on a schedule. Some people find it early. They meet someone at 18, 20, 22, and it feels like their life's just clicked into place. But for a lot of people, it takes longer. Not because they're less worthy, but because the kind of love they're meant to have requires the right person. And the right person isn't someone who hesitates about you. It's not someone who keeps you guessing. It's not someone who makes you question whether you matter. The right person doesn't make you feel like you're asking for too much just by wanting to be chosen. They make it clear, effortlessly. And when that kind of love finally shows up, it doesn't feel like chasing. It doesn't feel like proving yourself. It doesn't feel like begging someone to stay. It feels calm, like something that was always supposed to happen just at the right time. So if you've been sitting with that question for a long time, if you've spent nights wondering whether anyone will ever truly choose you, here's the truth you need to hear. The fact that the wrong people left your life doesn't mean the right person never will enter it. It just means your story hasn't reached that chapter yet. And one day, when someone finally walks into your life and stays without hesitation, you'll realize something that used to be impossible to believe. You were never unlovable. You were just waiting for someone who could actually see you, There's a version of you that exists only in your head. It's the version that said the wrong thing in that conversation 3 years ago and is still replaying it. The version that's already prepared a full emotional response to a fight that hasn't happened yet. The version that read one slightly short text message and spent 45 minutes building a case for why everything is falling apart. That version of you is exhausting, and it never sleeps. And if you're being honest, it runs a lot more of your life than you'd like to admit. I've been thinking about this for a while, not in a clinical way. I'm not here to diagnose anything or hand you a breathing exercise, but in the way you think about something when you've lived inside it long enough that you finally want to understand it. When the pattern has repeated enough times that you're done being surprised by it and ready to actually look at it. Because I think a lot of us are losing to our own minds, quietly, daily, in ways that don't look dramatic from the outside, but are absolutely exhausting from the inside. And I think we've been told it's just anxiety, it's just overthinking. Take a walk, drink some water, journal about it. And none of that is wrong exactly, but it's also not quite getting at the thing. The thing is deeper than a habit, it's closer to a worldview. Let me start at the beginning, or at least the beginning as I understand it. Your mind learned to do this. It wasn't born doing it. At some point, probably pretty early, you were in a situation where paying close attention to other people's moods and signals and the slightest shifts in their behavior was actually useful. Where catching the early warning signs kept you from getting hurt. Where being one step ahead of a situation meant you could manage it before it managed you. So your brain got good at that. Really good. Exceptionally, almost professionally good at scanning for threat, at noticing the micro shift in someone's tone and running it through a threat assessment model at lightning speed, at filling in the gaps between what people say and what they might mean with worst case scenarios, because worst case scenarios are what your brain learned to prepare for. That was adaptive once. It kept you safe. It helped you navigate something that was genuinely hard to navigate, but you carried it out of that situation and into every situation after it. And now you're threat scanning in a text message from someone who loves you. Now you're running worst case scenarios about a meeting that hasn't happened yet. Now you're braced for impact in environments that are not actually dangerous, with people who are not actually threatening, because your nervous system never got the memo that the original thing ended. It's still doing its job. The job is just wrong for where you are now. Here's what overthinking actually feels like from the inside, because I think it gets flattened into a word, overthinking, and that word doesn't capture the texture of it. It starts with a small thing, almost always a small thing that your mind snags on the way a nail snags a piece of clothing, something someone said or didn't say, the way a conversation ended, a silence that lasted a second too long, a tone that was slightly off from how it usually sounds. Most people's brains would register that small thing, file it under probably nothing, and move on. Your brain doesn't do that. Your brain picks it up and starts turning it over, looking at it from every angle, running through possible explanations, building a context around it. And because your brain is very good at building context, because you are honestly an intelligent and perceptive person, the context it builds is detailed, specific, coherent. It has internal logic, it hangs together. It just might be completely wrong. And here's the brutal part. You know it might be wrong. Somewhere in there, underneath all the architecture your brain is constructing, there's a quieter voice saying, you don't actually know this. You're guessing this might be nothing. But the louder voice, like the one with all the evidence it's been collecting, the one that has built this whole case, that voice is very convincing. It has receipts. It has a timeline. It has a narrative that makes sense, so you believe it, or at least you half believe it, enough to act on it, enough to pull back a little or go quiet or preemptively protect yourself from a wound that might not be coming. And then the thing you were afraid of might actually happen, not because you were right, but because the way you responded to your own fear created the distance you were trying to prevent. That's the loop. That's the one that runs your life if you let it. I want to talk about relationships specifically because I think this is where the overthinking mind does its most significant damage. And I think it's because relationships are inherently ambiguous. People are complicated, communication is imperfect, feelings shift. And ambiguity is exactly the kind of environment where an overthinking brain absolutely goes to town. You're with someone, or close to being with someone, and things are good, things are genuinely good, but your brain doesn't fully trust good. Good feels precarious. Good feels like a setup for something. So even while things are good, there's a part of you that's quietly scanning for the thing that's going to make it not good. And because you're scanning for it, you find things. Not because they're definitely there, but because if you look hard enough at anything, any relationship, any person, you will find ambiguity. You will find moments that could be read multiple ways. You will find evidence for almost any narrative if that's what you're building. So you find something, a slightly distant response, a canceled plan, a moment where they seemed somewhere else, and the machine kicks in. And now you're building the case for why this is falling apart while simultaneously pretending everything is fine. Because you know that bringing this up will make you seem crazy, will make you seem like too much, so you hold it. You process it internally. You have the conversation in your head 100 times. You prepare for outcomes that haven't happened. You grieve things that are still here. And all of that invisible work, all of that mental labor that the other person has no idea is happening, exhausts you, makes you quieter than you actually are, makes you pull back when you want to be close, makes you act in ways that are slightly misaligned with how you actually feel, because you're not responding to reality. You're responding to the story your brain wrote about reality, and eventually, inevitably, the other person notices that something is off, not what's actually off. They can't see that. It's all internal, just that something is off, and they adjust. And you interpret their adjustment as confirmation of the story you already wrote, and the loop tightens. Here's the part I want to sit with for a minute, because I think it's the part that gets missed. Overthinking isn't just a processing style. It's also, underneath everything, a form of control. Stay with me on this. When you can't control whether someone is going to hurt you, and you never can. That's just the fundamental vulnerability of caring about people. Your brain finds another way to feel in control. It prepares, it anticipates, it runs every possible scenario so that when something goes wrong, at least you saw it coming. At least you're not blindsided. At least the pain arrives in a context you already built. Because being blindsided feels worse than being right about something bad. Being surprised by loss feels more devastating than having predicted it. So your brain works very hard, all the time, to make sure you are never surprised. The cost of that is never being fully present, never being fully relaxed into something good, always holding a part of yourself back, just in case, always watching the door even when you're inside somewhere warm. It's a terrible trade, but it feels like the safer one, and your brain is always going to root toward what feels safe. Let me tell you what the really insidious version of this looks like. Because the everyday overthinking, the text analysis, the reading of rooms, the pre-lived arguments, that stuff is visible enough that you can at least identify it. The insidious version is quieter. It's the way you talk yourself out of good things before they have a chance to become good. Someone shows interest, and instead of letting yourself feel that, you immediately start cataloging their flaws. Not because they're actually deal breakers, because if you can find enough flaws, then when it doesn't work out, you can point to the flaws. You already knew you were never fully in it. It's the way you self-sabotage in advance. Pull back before they can pull back. End it before it can end badly. Leave before you can be left. It's the way you rewrite your own history to confirm the story your brain likes to tell. You felt something real, and then it hurt. And now when you look back at it, your brain has quietly edited the memory so that the signs were always there. You should have known. You were naive to trust it. Look how clearly it was written on the wall from the beginning. It wasn't written on the wall from the beginning. You were just present, open, hoping, the way a person is supposed to be. And something went wrong. And now your brain is retroactively building the case that you should have been closed. Because being closed would have hurt less. Being closed would have hurt less. And also produced nothing. And also made you smaller. And also been a kind of living death. But your brain doesn't calculate for aliveness, it calculates for safety. And sometimes safety and aliveness point in completely opposite directions. I've been thinking about the relationship between overthinking and self-worth, because I don't think they're separate things. I think a lot of people who overthink, not all, but a lot, do it because somewhere underneath the mental noise, there is a quiet belief that they are more likely to be rejected than not, that if someone really knew them, they'd leave. That the connection they feel is always more fragile than it appears, because they are, in some fundamental way, more difficult to love than other people, and the overthinking is partly an attempt to manage that. If you can see the rejection coming, you can prepare. If you can find the evidence early, you're not naive. If you hold back a little, you're protected. But also, and this is the part that's harder to say, the overthinking feeds that belief. Because when you're constantly generating worst case scenarios, constantly looking for the signs of leaving, constantly preparing for the end, you are practicing the belief that the end is inevitable. You are rehearsing it. You are making it more real in your body and your nervous system every single time you run the simulation. The mind is very literal about what it practices. If you practice being rejected, your brain gets better at feeling rejected. If you spend enough time preparing for loss, your nervous system stops distinguishing between the preparation and the actual thing. You end up carrying the emotional weight of a loss that hasn't happened. And you do that every day, for weeks, months, years. And then people ask why you seem tired. So what do you do with it? I'm not going to pretend I have the full answer. I don't think the full answer exists in a way that can be written down and handed to you, but I do think there are some true things worth saying. The first one is, your thoughts are not facts. I know that sounds like something on a motivational poster, and I'm sorry about that because it's actually a profound and difficult thing to practice. Your mind produces thoughts the way your body produces heat, constantly, automatically, without your permission. And not all of those thoughts are accurate. Not all of those thoughts deserve to be believed. The feeling of certainty that your brain attaches to its worst case scenarios is not evidence that those scenarios are real. It's just evidence that your brain is very good at its job. The second one is, presence is the antidote, and presence is hard. Because presence means actually being in the moment you're in, not the moment your brain has already moved to. It means feeling the good thing while it's happening, instead of scanning it for the reasons it won't last. It means trusting, not blindly, not naively, but with the actual evidence in front of you, that right now, things are okay. Letting okay be okay without immediately upgrading it to a threat. The third one, and this is the one that took me the longest, is that you have to grieve the version of safety that overthinking promises. Because it does promise something. It promises that if you think hard enough, prepare enough, stay alert enough, you will be protected. You will not be caught off guard. You will not be hurt in the ways you've been hurt before. That promise is a lie, but it's a comforting lie, and giving it up means accepting that you cannot think your way to safety in relationships. You cannot prepare your way out of vulnerability. The only way through is actually through, open, present, willing to be surprised by both the good and the bad. That is terrifying if you are someone who has been hurt, and most of the people reading this have been hurt. But the alternative, staying inside the machine, living in the pre-lived loss, holding yourself back from the full experience of being alive with another person, that's not safety. That's just a slower kind of missing out. Your mind gets the best of you because it loves you in its way. It is trying to protect you. It learned something once about how the world works, and it has been faithfully applying that lesson ever since. Even when the lesson no longer applies, even when the environment changed and the people changed and you changed, it doesn't know it's out of date. It just keeps running the old program, trying to keep you safe, costing you peace. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are not fundamentally harder to love than other people. You are someone whose brain learned to be very careful, and that carefulness served a purpose once, and now it's costing you more than it's protecting you. And the work, the long, uncomfortable, ongoing, nonlinear work, is teaching it that it's okay to put the armor down. Not all the way, not all at once, just enough to let something real get in, just enough to be here, actually here, in the life you're living instead of the one your mind keeps rehearsing. That's the whole thing, that's all of it. Let yourself be here.